My family called me obsessed when I spent 4 years perfecting my Arabic, until the morning armed militants stormed the Valdoran Embassy, and I became the only person standing between 23 hostages and an international catastrophe. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But let me start from the beginning, because the road to that moment was paved with years of eye rolls, family dinners turned into lectures about practical choices, and a sister who never missed a chance to remind everyone that my language hobby was just another way to avoid getting a real job. My name is Zara Millfield, and I've always heard languages the way other people hear music. Growing up in the quiet suburb of Pinehaven, Connecticut, I could pick up the rhythm of Portuguese from our neighbor Mrs. Vasquez, catch the melodic flow of Mandarin from the family who ran the corner market, and somehow absorb the rolling sounds of Arabic from the late-night international news my father always had playing in his study. My family thought it was cute when I was 12 and teaching myself Spanish from library books. They smiled indulgently when I added French in high school, even bragged to friends when I picked up conversational Italian during a summer abroad in college. But somewhere around my junior year at Whitmore University, when I declared my major as International Languages with a focus on Arabic and Middle Eastern Studies, the smiles started to fade. Arabic? My sister Delilah had said, her perfectly manicured eyebrows arching in that way that always made me feel like I was being examined under a microscope. Zara, be serious. When are you ever going to use Arabic in Pinehaven? Delilah worked in marketing for a pharmaceutical company in Hartford. She drove a silver BMW, lived in a downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows, and measured success in quarterly bonuses and corner office views. She was everything our parents had hoped I would become: practical, profitable, and completely mystified by my choice to spend 4 years studying what she called random foreign languages nobody speaks here. My parents tried to be supportive, at least at first. Dad would nod thoughtfully when I explained the geopolitical importance of Arabic and international relations. Mom would ask polite questions about my professors and coursework, but I could see the worry creeping into their conversations, the way they'd exchange glances when I talked about my plans after graduation. The breaking point came during my senior year, at Thanksgiving dinner at Aunt Cordelia's house in Westbridge. The whole extended family was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone gathered around the dining room table that groaned under the weight of turkey, stuffing, and years of family expectations. "So, Zara," my uncle Bartholomew had said, carving knife poised over the bird, "what's the plan after graduation? Finally going to put those language skills to work somewhere practical?" Before I could answer, Delilah jumped in with that laugh she'd perfected, the one that sounded supportive but felt like glass breaking. "Zara's going to be a translator," she announced to the table. "She's been learning Arabic for 4 years now." The silence that followed was deafening. Forks paused halfway to mouths. My teenage cousin Fletcher actually looked up from his phone. "Arabic?" my Aunt Cordelia repeated slowly, as if testing the word in her mouth. "That's interesting." "It's not just interesting," I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "It's one of the most important languages in international diplomacy, business, and—" "Honey," my mother interrupted gently, "we know you're passionate about this, but Delilah raises a good point. Where exactly in Connecticut are you going to use Arabic?" Uncle Bartholomew chuckled, the sound rich with condescension. "Maybe she can translate the menu at that new Mediterranean place downtown." The table erupted in polite laughter. Everyone, except me. "There are opportunities," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "The international department, international nonprofits, multinational corporations." "In Washington, maybe," Delilah said, cutting me off. "But Zara, you're not exactly the Washington type. You like quiet libraries and coffee shops. You've never even been on a plane by yourself." That stung because it was partially true. I preferred books to networking events, small conversations to large presentations, but that didn't mean I couldn't handle bigger challenges when they mattered. Besides, Raven added, helping herself to more cranberry sauce, isn't Arabic really difficult? All those squiggly lines and reading backwards? Seems like a lot of work for something you might never use. Right to left, I corrected automatically, and the script is actually quite logical once you understand the patterns. More polite smiles, more gentle laughter, more glances that said, "Poor Zara, so smart but so impractical." The conversation moved on to Fletcher's football season and Raven's internship at a local bank. Safe topics, practical topics, topics that made sense in the comfortable, predictable world of Pinehaven, Connecticut. But I sat there, pushing stuffing around my plate, burning with a frustration I couldn't quite name. They saw my language skills as a hobby, something quaint and ultimately useless. They couldn't see what I saw, the beauty of connecting across cultures, the power of understanding what others couldn't, the doors that opened when you could speak to people in their own tongue. After dinner, as we loaded dishes into the dishwasher, Delilah pulled me aside. She said, her voice softer now, almost gentle. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean. I just worry about you. This Arabic thing, it's been 4 years, Zara. 4 years you could have been studying something that leads to actual job opportunities. Marketing, business, even teaching elementary school. Something real." "This is real to me," I said quietly. She sighed, the kind of sigh that carried the weight of older sister wisdom. "Zara, I love that you're curious about the world. I do. But curiosity doesn't pay student loans. When are you going to stop playing with languages and start building a career?" That night, lying in my childhood bedroom with its faded posters of foreign cities I dreamed of visiting, I wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I was being impractical. Maybe 4 years of Arabic study was just an expensive way to satisfy curiosity that would never amount to anything meaningful. But something deep in my chest rebelled against that thought. Languages weren't just sounds and symbols to me. They were bridges. They were keys to understanding. They were tools that could matter in ways my family couldn't imagine. I just had no idea how much they would matter, or how soon. 3 months later, I would find myself standing in the marble lobby of the Valdoran Embassy in downtown Hartford, my heart pounding as armed voices shouted in rapid Arabic, and every person in that building, diplomats, security guards, visitors, looking at me with desperate eyes because I was the only one who understood what the militants were saying. But that morning, as I lay in my old bed listening to the familiar sounds of Pinehaven settling into sleep, all I knew was that my family thought my passion was pointless. They had no idea it would soon save lives. Graduation day arrived with the kind of crisp May morning that should have felt like triumph. Instead, as I walked across the stage at Whitmore University to receive my degree in international languages, I could hear Delilah's voice in my head. Now what? The question haunted me through the summer as I sent out dozens of applications to international organizations, government agencies, and multinational corporations. Each rejection email felt like confirmation of my family's doubts. "Thank you for your interest, but we're looking for candidates with more practical experience. While your language skills are impressive, we need someone with a business background. We've decided to move forward with other candidates." By August, I was working part-time at Riverside Books, a small independent bookstore in downtown Pinehaven, shelving novels and ringing up customers who paid in cash for romance paperbacks and local history guides. It wasn't exactly the international career I'd imagined. Delilah stopped by one afternoon, her heels clicking against the worn wooden floors as she browsed the foreign language section with barely concealed amusement. "Arabic English dictionary," she said, holding up a thick red volume. $42. You know, Zara, you could probably write your own by now and make some actual money off all that studying. "It's not about the money," I said, not looking up from the inventory list I was pretending to read. "Right," she said, setting the dictionary back on the shelf with deliberate care. "It's about passion. I forgot. But passion doesn't pay rent. How long is Mrs. Gwendolyn going to let you live in that studio apartment above the bookstore? Mrs. Gwendolyn Hartwell, the bookstore owner, had offered me the tiny one-bedroom apartment upstairs at a discounted rate. It wasn't much: slanted ceilings, a kitchenette that barely fit a hot plate, and windows that looked out onto the parking lot behind Pinehaven's only coffee shop. But it was mine, and the rent was manageable on a bookstore clerk's salary. "She's not letting me do anything," I said. "I pay rent." "Barely," she replied. "Zara, I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to be realistic. It's been 3 months since graduation. Maybe it's time to consider that this Arabic thing was a phase, not a career path." That evening, I climbed the narrow stairs to my apartment and sat at my small kitchen table with my laptop, scrolling through job listings that felt increasingly irrelevant. Administrative assistant positions that required basic computer skills, retail management jobs that promised advancement opportunities, teaching positions at local elementary schools that would put my education degree to use even if it meant abandoning everything I'd spent 4 years learning. The worst part was the growing certainty that maybe Delilah was right. Maybe I had been naive to think that studying Arabic in Connecticut would lead to anything meaningful. Maybe practical people like my sister understood something about the world that I'd missed while buried in textbooks and language labs. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Dinner Sunday? Dad's making his famous lasagna. Delilah will be there." I knew what Sunday dinner would bring. More gentle questions about my job search, more concerned glances between my parents, more of Delilah's helpful suggestions about practical career paths that made use of my other skills. The breaking point came in September at my cousin Fletcher's birthday party. The whole family had gathered at my Aunt Cordelia's house in Westridge, the same dining room where I'd endured Thanksgiving interrogation 9 months earlier. Fletcher was turning 18, heading off to Bentley College to study business administration. Everyone was full of praise for his practical choice, his clear career path, his bright future in corporate America. "It's so smart," my Aunt Cordelia gushed, cutting another slice of chocolate cake. "Business opens so many doors, not like these specialized degrees that limit your options." She didn't look at me when she said it, but I felt the words like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Uncle Bartholomew raised his beer bottle in a toast. "To Fletcher, who's got his head on straight, no wasting time on hobbies disguised as education." The laughter that followed was loud and hearty. Everyone except me joined in. "Speaking of education," my cousin Raven said, turning to me with that bright, innocent smile that always preceded something cutting. "How's the job search going, Zara? Found anyone who needs an Arabic translator in Connecticut yet?" More laughter. Even my parents smiled, though they tried to hide it behind sips of coffee. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "there are more opportunities than people realize. International business, diplomatic services, cultural consulting." "Cultural consulting?" Delilah interrupted, her eyebrows raised in genuine curiosity. "What does that even mean?" I fumbled for an explanation that would sound legitimate to a room full of people who measured value in quarterly reports and annual salaries. Companies that work in Middle Eastern markets need people who understand the cultural nuances, the business practices, "In Connecticut?" Uncle Bartholomew asked, genuine confusion in his voice. The question hung in the air like smoke from birthday candles. In Connecticut. That was always the catch. Everything I described made sense in Washington, D.C., or New York City, or overseas postings with international organizations. But here, in the comfortable suburban bubble of Pinehaven, it all sounded like fantasy. "Maybe," my father said gently, "it's time to think about graduate school, something more versatile. Like an MBA, Delilah added quickly. You could still use your language skills in international business, but you'd have the practical foundation employers actually want." The conversation moved on, but I sat frozen, cake untouched on my plate, watching my family discuss my future like I wasn't in the room. They meant well. I knew they meant well. They loved me and wanted me to succeed And from their perspective, success meant stability, predictability, a career path that made sense to neighbors and extended family members. But something in me rebelled against the idea of abandoning 4 years of passionate study for something practical. Arabic wasn't just a collection of vocabulary words and grammar rules to me. It was a doorway to understanding a part of the world that most Americans never bothered to explore. It was conversations with exchange students who lit up when they realized I could understand their homesickness. It was reading poetry that lost its beauty in translation. It was connection across cultures that felt sacred to me. That night, back in my studio apartment above the bookstore, I stood at my window looking down at the empty parking lot, streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. My reflection stared back at me. 22 years old, college-educated, fluent in Arabic, and working retail in a town where nobody spoke anything but English. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being stubborn, clinging to an impractical dream while real opportunities passed me by. Maybe it was time to be realistic about what the world actually needed from someone like me. I was reaching for my laptop, ready to start researching MBA programs, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, with a 860 area code. Hartford. Hello, is this Zara Millfield? The voice was professional, crisp, urgent. Yes, this is Zara. My name is Director Patricia Holbrook from the Connecticut State International Affairs Office. I got your name from your professor at Whitmore University, Dr. Al-Rahman. We have an urgent situation developing, and we need someone who speaks fluent Arabic. Are you available? I looked around my tiny apartment, at the Arabic textbooks still stacked on my desk, at the dictionary Delilah had mocked, and the certificates and awards from my language studies that I had hung on the wall like declarations of faith in something no one else believed in. Yes, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm available. Can you be in Hartford by 8 a.m. tomorrow? The situation is time-sensitive. Outside my window, Pinehaven slept peacefully, unaware that everything was about to change. I'll be there. And for the first time since graduation, I felt like the 4 years of Arabic study were about to matter in ways my family couldn't imagine. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Director Holbrook's voice, crisp, urgent, professional in a way that made my retail job feel like playing dress-up. By 5 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely and stood under the lukewarm spray of my tiny shower, trying to calm the nervous energy that had been building since the phone call. What could be so urgent that the Connecticut State International Affairs Office needed an Arabic translator immediately? And why me? Dr. Al-Rahman had been my favorite professor at Whitmore, but I hadn't spoken to him since graduation 3 months ago. The fact that he'd recommended me for something this serious both thrilled and terrified me. I chose my most professional outfit, a navy blazer Delilah had given me for job interviews, paired with black slacks and the only pair of dress shoes I owned. Looking in my bathroom mirror, I barely recognized myself. For months, I'd been wearing the casual clothes of a bookstore clerk. Today, I looked like someone who belonged in government offices and important meetings. The drive to Hartford took 45 minutes through Connecticut's rolling hills, past suburban developments, giving way to office parks, and finally to the imposing government buildings downtown. The Connecticut State International Affairs Office occupied 3 floors of a gleaming modern building that seemed to scrape the early morning sky. Security was tighter than I had expected. Metal detectors, ID checks, visitor badges that had to be worn at all times. The guard who processed my paperwork looked at me with the kind of professional assessment I wasn't used to receiving at the bookstore. "First time working with the state office?" he asked, scanning my driver's license. "Yes, sir." "Director Holbrook's expecting you. Elevator to the 7th floor, suite 704. She's waiting." The elevator ride gave me 30 seconds to wonder what I was walking into. The building hummed with the kind of quiet efficiency that spoke of important decisions and international consequences. People in expensive suits hurried past with briefcases and expressions of focused urgency. Suite 704 was a maze of cubicles and private offices, all glass and steel and the soft murmur of serious conversations. A receptionist with silver hair and sharp eyes directed me to Director Holbrook's corner office. Patricia Holbrook was nothing like I'd expected. Tall, probably in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. She looked up from a stack of files as I knocked on her open door. "Ms. Millfield, thank you for coming so quickly." She gestured to a chair across from her desk. "Please, sit. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." I sat, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "Dr. Al-Rahman said you needed someone who speaks Arabic." "Fluent Arabic," she corrected. "Not conversational, not academic level. Fluent enough to handle complex negotiations under pressure." Her eyes studied my face. "Dr. Al-Rahman assures me you're capable of that level of communication." "I am," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Director Holbrook opened the top file on her desk. "Are you familiar with the Valdoran Embassy?" I searched my memory. Valdoran, a small Middle Eastern nation that had been in the news recently due to political instability. It's a relatively new diplomatic mission, isn't it? They established formal relations with the United States about 5 years ago. Correct. Their embassy here in Hartford handles consular services for Valdoran nationals living throughout New England. Normally, it's a quiet operation. Visa applications, passport renewals, cultural exchange programs. She paused, her expression growing more serious. This morning, that changed. She slid a photograph across the desk. It showed a modest 3-story building with Middle Eastern architectural details, arched windows, intricate stonework, a small courtyard visible through wrought iron gates. At approximately 6:30 this morning, 4 armed individuals entered the Valdoran Embassy. They're holding 23 people hostage. Embassy staff, visitors who were there for early appointments, and a group of American students who were applying for study abroad visas. My stomach dropped. Terrorists? We don't know yet. They haven't made any demands. They haven't communicated with local police or federal authorities. The only thing we know for certain is that they're speaking Arabic, and none of our usual translators are available on such short notice. She opened another file, this one containing what looked like intelligence reports and building schematics. The Hartford Police Department has surrounded the building, but they're proceeding with extreme caution. The FBI is en route, but their Arabic speakers are either in Washington or overseas on assignment. The State Department is sending someone, but they won't arrive until this afternoon. "And you need me to translate?" I said, beginning to understand the magnitude of what she was asking. "More than translate," Director Holbrook said. "We need someone who can listen to whatever communication comes from inside that building and provide real-time analysis, not just word-for-word translation, but cultural context, emotional subtext, anything that might help us understand who these people are and what they want." The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. 23 people, armed militants, international implications. This wasn't the kind of opportunity I dreamed about in college. It was the kind of responsibility that could save lives, or, if I made a mistake, cost them. Dr. Al-Rahman said you spent a semester in Jordan, that you have experience with multiple Arabic dialects, not just modern standard Arabic. I nodded. I studied at the University of Jordan in Amman. I lived with a host family, spoke Arabic exclusively for 4 months. I'm familiar with Levantine dialects, Gulf Arabic, some Egyptian colloquialisms. Good. We have no idea where these individuals are from, so dialect recognition could be crucial. She closed the files and leaned forward. "Ms. Millfield, I want to be completely transparent with you. This is not a safe assignment. You'll be working directly with law enforcement at a volatile scene. There are no guarantees about how this situation will develop." I thought about my family, Delilah's concerned lectures about practical career choices, my parents' gentle suggestions about graduate school. The laughter at Fletcher's birthday party when my cousin asked if anyone in Connecticut actually needed Arabic translation. What would I be doing specifically? I asked. You'd be stationed in our mobile command unit parked 2 blocks from the embassy. Any communication from inside the building would be relayed to you immediately for translation and analysis. You'd work directly with the FBI negotiation team once they arrive, and potentially with State Department officials. She paused, studying my expression. I won't lie to you, this could be dangerous. It will certainly be stressful. But Dr. Al-Rahman spoke very highly of your abilities, not just your language skills, but your composure under pressure. He mentioned that you'd handled some difficult situations during your time in Jordan. I remembered the semester in Amman, navigating cultural misunderstandings, helping other American students when they got lost or confused, serving as an informal translator when my host family's elderly grandfather fell ill and needed to communicate with doctors who spoke limited English. Those had felt like small moments at the time, but Dr. Al-Rahman had apparently seen something in them worth recommending. If I do this and something goes wrong, then we'll deal with the consequences together. But Ms. Millfield, right now you're the most qualified person available. Those 23 people inside that building need someone who can understand what's happening and help us respond appropriately. I thought about the phone call I'd received just 12 hours ago, when I've been ready to give up on my Arabic studies and apply to MBA programs. I thought about my tiny apartment above the bookstore, my part-time job shelving novels, the growing certainty that my family had been right about my impractical choices. And then I thought about 23 people sitting in a building 2 miles away, their safety potentially dependent on someone who could bridge the communication gap between their captors and the authorities trying to help them. What time do you need me to be ready? I asked. Director Holbrook smiled for the first time since I'd entered her office. You're ready now. The command unit is being set up as we speak, and the first FBI negotiators are arriving within the hour. She stood, gathering the files from her desk. Ms. Millfield, I want you to understand something. What happens today could change the trajectory of your career. If you handle this well, and I believe you will, doors will open that you didn't even know existed. As we walked toward the elevator, I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman staring back at me looked different from the one who'd driven to Hartford that morning. More serious, more purposeful, like someone who belonged in buildings where important decisions were made. One more thing, Director Holbrook said as we waited for the elevator. Once we're at the scene, everything you hear and see is classified. You cannot discuss this with anyone, family, friends, anyone, until the situation is resolved and we've debriefed. I nodded, understanding that my family wouldn't know where I was or what I was doing. They'd assume I was at the bookstore, shelving novels and ringing up customers, completely unaware that their daughter, the one whose Arabic studies they'd dismissed as impractical, was about to step into the most important moment of her life. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped inside. As we descended toward the parking garage, I realized that everything was about to change. 4 years of Arabic study, 3 months of doubt, and 1 urgent phone call had led to this moment. 23 people were counting on me, and for the first time since graduation, I felt ready for the challenge. The mobile command unit looked like something out of a movie, a massive black vehicle bristling with communication equipment, satellite dishes, and antennas that reached toward the cloudy Hartford sky. It was parked on Elm Street, 2 blocks from the Valdoran Embassy, surrounded by police cruisers, FBI vehicles, and news vans that had already begun gathering despite the early hour. Director Holbrook led me through a maze of law enforcement personnel, all wearing tactical vests and expressions of grim focus. Hartford police officers created a perimeter, while FBI agents in dark suits spoke into earpieces and studied building schematics spread across the hoods of their cars. The situation has evolved since we spoke an hour ago. The militants made contact, Director Holbrook said as we approached the command unit. My pulse quickened. What did they say? That's what we need you to tell us.
Inside the command unit, banks of monitors displayed feeds from security cameras positioned around the embassy. I could see the building's main entrance, the courtyard, several windows on the upper floors. The interior cameras had been disabled, but thermal imaging showed clusters of heat signatures, presumably the hostages and their captors. Agent Rebecca Torres, the FBI's lead negotiator, looked up from a communication console as we entered. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with short dark hair and intense brown eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. "Ms. Millfield?" she asked. "Thank God you're here. We recorded the initial communication, but our on-site translator is having difficulty with the dialect." She gestured toward a balding man in his 50s who sat hunched over a laptop, headphones pressed to his ears, and a frustrated expression creasing his face. "Agent Morrison has been working with Arabic for 15 years, but this is outside his usual wheelhouse," Agent Torres explained. Agent Morrison looked up, relief evident in his expression. "It's not modern standard Arabic, it's heavily dialectical, and there are some phrases I'm not catching. Could be Gulf, could be Levantine, maybe even North African influences." Director Holbrook pulled out a chair for me at the central console. "We need you to listen to the recording and give us everything you can. Literal translation, cultural context, emotional tone, anything that might help us understand who we're dealing with." I sat down, trying to project calm while my heart hammered against my ribs. Agent Morrison handed me a pair of high-quality headphones, and Agent Torres pulled up the audio file. This came in at 7:45 a.m. The caller used the embassy's main line to contact Hartford Police Dispatch. "Ready?" I nodded and slipped on the headphones. The audio quality was surprisingly clear. Police communication equipment was apparently much better than anything I'd used in college language labs.
"It's Palestinian Arabic," I said, consulting my notes. "The speaker is highly emotional, not just angry, but grieving. He says, 'You have taken everything from us, and now you will understand what it means to lose what you cannot replace.'" I looked up at the circle of faces around me: Director Holbrook, Agent Torres, Agent Morrison, and several other FBI personnel whose names I hadn't caught. He mentions Valdoran specifically, calls it the puppet government that dances while our children starve. There's a reference to something that happened 3 days ago. He says, 3 days ago, you murdered hope itself. Agent Torres was typing rapidly on her laptop. "Anything else?" "Yes. He's not alone. He refers to we and us throughout, and at one point he says something like, 'My brothers and I will not leave this place until the world sees the truth.' But here's what's interesting. He doesn't make any specific demands. No prisoner releases, no political concessions, no ransom requests. He just keeps saying that people need to witness and understand." Director Holbrook leaned forward. "Witness what?" "That's not clear from the recording, but the emotional tone suggests this is personal, not ideological. Whatever happened 3 days ago, it hurt these people badly enough to drive them to this extreme." Agent Morrison nodded slowly. "That matches what I was getting, but I was missing the cultural nuances. The way you're describing it, this sounds less like organized terrorism and more like a revenge action." Agent Torres's phone buzzed. She answered quickly, listened for 30 seconds, then hung up with a grim expression. "That was State Department. 3 days ago, Valdoran military forces conducted an operation in the Zahra refugee camp on the Syrian border. 17 people were killed, including several children. Valdoran claims they were targeting terrorist cells, but international observers are calling it an unprovoked attack on civilians." The pieces clicked into place in my mind. These aren't international terrorists. They're probably relatives or friends of people who were killed in that camp. They came here to force attention on what happened. "Which makes them more dangerous," Agent Torres said grimly. "Ideological terrorists follow patterns, have clear objectives. People acting out of personal grief are unpredictable." A communications technician at one of the monitoring stations looked up.
We've got movement inside the building. Thermal imaging shows the subjects gathering the hostages in what looks like the main conference room on the second floor. Director Holbrook studied the thermal display. Are they separating Americans from Valdoran nationals? Can't tell from heat signatures alone, but they've moved everyone from the first floor up to the second. Agent Torres turned back to me. Miss Millfield, we may need to establish direct communication with these individuals. Are you prepared to serve as our primary translator for negotiations? The weight of what she was asking settled over me like a lead blanket. These weren't practice conversations with classmates or friendly chats with my host family in Amman. These were life and death negotiations with desperate, grieving people who had already crossed the line into violent action. What would that involve? I asked. If they call again, you'd listen in real time and provide immediate translation. If we need to communicate with them, you'd help us craft responses that are culturally appropriate and emotionally sensitive. The goal is to establish trust, understand their motivations, and ultimately convince them to release the hostages. I thought about my conversation with Delilah just days ago, when she'd asked when I was going to stop playing with languages and start building a career. I thought about my parents' gentle suggestions about practical graduate programs. I thought about my cousin Raven's mocking question about whether anyone in Connecticut actually needed Arabic translation. 23 people needed it right now. I'll do it, I said. Agent Torres smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her since entering the command unit. Good. Now, while we're waiting for their next communication, I want you to help us understand the cultural dynamics we're dealing with. If these are Palestinians seeking revenge for the deaths of family members, how do we approach them? What matters to them? What might convince them to stand down? I spent the next hour providing what amounted to an intensive cultural briefing. We discussed concepts of honor and shame in Palestinian culture, the importance of bearing witness to injustice, the role of grief in decision-making, and the ways that personal tragedy could drive people to actions they might never have considered under normal circumstances. Agent Morrison, who had initially seemed skeptical of my presence, began asking increasingly sophisticated questions about dialectical variations and regional speech patterns. Director Holbrook took detailed notes and asked about negotiating strategies that might resonate with people from refugee camp backgrounds. But it was Agent Torres who asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter. Miss Millfield, in your professional opinion, are these people willing to die for their cause? I thought about the grief and fury I'd heard in that first recording, about the reference to murdered children and destroyed hope. Yes, I said quietly, but I don't think they want to kill innocent people. They want to be heard. They want the world to know what happened to their families. Then our job, Agent Torres said, is to convince them that we're listening. At 10:15 a.m., the phone rang again. This time, I was ready. The phone's shrill ring cut through the tension in the command unit like a knife. Agent Torres's hand hovered over the answer button as she looked at me for confirmation. I adjusted my headphones, opened a fresh notebook, and nodded. Hartford Police, this is Agent Torres with the FBI. Who am I speaking with?
The voice that came through my headphones was different from the first caller. Younger, more nervous, but still speaking the same Palestinian dialect I'd identified earlier. His words came in rapid bursts, punctuated by heavy breathing that suggested he was either injured or in a state of near panic. I started translating immediately, speaking quietly into my own microphone so the team could hear without interfering with the call. He says his name is Khalil, I whispered. He's asking if we've seen the news about Zara camp. He wants to know if we know what the Valdoran military did to his sister's children. Agent Torres kept her voice steady and professional. We're aware of the situation at Zara camp. We want to help resolve this peacefully. Are the people in the building safe? I translated her words into Arabic, then listened to Khalil's response. His voice cracked with emotion as he spoke,
and I found myself gripping my pen tighter as I struggled to capture not just his words, but the raw pain behind them. "He says the people are safe for now, but he doesn't trust us," I translated. "He says Americans always promise help, but never deliver." He's describing what happened. His sister, Amira, lived in the camp with her 3 children. The oldest was 7, the youngest was 3. They were killed when the Valdoran forces bombed what they claimed was a weapons cache, but it was actually a school. Agent Torres closed her eyes briefly. "Tell him we're sorry for his loss. Tell him we want to understand what happened so we can help prevent it from happening again." As I translated, I could hear Khalil's breathing become more labored. Then his voice changed, becoming sharper, more desperate. "He's getting agitated," I warned the team. "He says we're lying, that we're just trying to trick him into surrendering. He says his brother Ahmed is bleeding and they need medical supplies, but if anyone tries to enter the building, they'll assume it's an attack." Agent Morrison looked up sharply. "One of them is injured?" "Sounds like it. And Khalil is scared, not just angry, but genuinely frightened. He keeps saying they didn't plan for this to go on so long." Agent Torres leaned closer to her microphone. "Khalil, if Ahmed needs medical attention, we can send someone to help him. A doctor, a paramedic, someone who's not armed, who's only there to provide medical care." I translated, then listened to a long stream of Arabic that grew increasingly emotional. Khalil's voice rose and fell like a tide of grief, and I found myself having to pause several times to make sure I was capturing everything accurately. "He's talking about the day it happened," I said, my voice quieter now. "He says Ahmed was supposed to visit his sister that morning, but he was delayed by work. When the bombs fell, Ahmed ran to the school to look for survivors. He pulled 2 children out of the rubble, but the building collapsed and crushed his leg. He's been in pain for 3 days, but they couldn't go to a hospital because the Valdoran authorities were arresting anyone connected to the camp." Director Holbrook was writing furiously on a legal pad. She held up a note. "Ask about the American students. Are they hurt?" "Khalil, we need to know about the Americans who were in the building, the students who came for visas. Are they injured? Do they need anything?" The response was longer this time, and I could hear other voices in the background. Someone speaking in what sounded like English, though I couldn't make out the words clearly. "He says the Americans are frightened but unharmed. He keeps saying they don't want to hurt innocent people, that they're not monsters. But he also says they can't leave until the world knows what really happened at Zara camp." Agent Torres exchanged glances with Director Holbrook. "What does he mean by the world knows?" I asked Khalil directly in Arabic, and his response sent a chill through me. "He says the Valdoran government is telling lies about what happened. They're claiming the camp was harboring terrorists, that the bombing was a surgical strike against enemy combatants, but Khalil has proof. Photographs, video footage from phones that belong to people who died. He says they won't leave until news organizations broadcast the truth about what happened to those children." "Jesus," Agent Morrison muttered. "They want media coverage." "Not coverage of this hostage situation, coverage of the massacre at the refugee camp. They're not seeking publicity for themselves, they're trying to force international attention on what they believe was a war crime." Director Holbrook was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through the implications. "Khalil, if we can arrange for journalists to see this evidence, if we can make sure the story gets told accurately, would you be willing to discuss releasing some of the hostages?" I translated, then listened to what sounded like a heated discussion in the background. Multiple voices were speaking Arabic now, some calmer than others. After nearly 2 minutes, Khalil came back on the line. "He's conferring with the others," I explained to the team. "There's disagreement. Someone, maybe Ahmed, is saying they can't trust our promises. But Khalil sounds like he wants to believe us." Finally, Khalil spoke directly to me in Arabic, his voice lower and more urgent than before. "He's asking me something," I said, surprised. "He wants to know if I'm really American or if I'm Palestinian. He says my Arabic is too good for someone who just learned it in school." Agent Torres looked concerned. "What do you tell him?" I made a quick decision. I'm going to be honest. Building trust requires authenticity.
I spoke directly into the phone in Arabic, explaining that I was American, but that I had studied in Jordan, lived with families who had connections to Palestine, heard stories about the diaspora and the camps. I told him I understood something about loss and displacement, even though I had never experienced it personally. His response was quieter, more thoughtful. "He says he believes me," I translated. "He says he can hear in my voice that I've listened to Palestinian mothers talk about their children. He's asking if I have children of my own." "No," I said in Arabic, then switched to English for the team. I told him no, but that I've worked with children, that I understand how precious they are. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Khalil gradually becoming more open about their situation. Ahmad's injury was worse than they'd initially let on, possible internal bleeding along with the leg injury. They had some basic first aid supplies, but nothing adequate for serious trauma care. More importantly, they were running out of time in ways they hadn't anticipated. The building's ventilation system had been damaged somehow, and the air quality in the conference room where they were holding the hostages was getting worse. Several of the older Valdoran nationals were having difficulty breathing. "He's scared," I told the team after ending the call. "This isn't going the way they planned. They thought they'd make their statement, get arrested, maybe serve some prison time. They didn't expect to be responsible for the lives of 23 people, including Americans." Agent Torres pulled up a building schematic on her laptop. "If the ventilation is compromised, we have a limited window before this becomes a medical emergency for everyone inside." Director Holbrook was already on her phone with someone, discussing media contacts and the possibility of arranging coverage for the refugee camp story. Agent Morrison was coordinating with medical personnel about possible ways to get supplies into the building. But I found myself thinking about Khalil's voice, the way it had changed when he talked about his sister's children. 7 years old, 5 years old, 3 years old. I imagined what it would feel like to lose family members that young, to believe that the world had forgotten about them, to feel so desperate for justice that you'd risk everything just to make people pay attention. My phone buzzed with a text message from Delilah. "How's the bookstore today? Slow Tuesday?" I stared at the message, realizing that my sister had no idea where I was or what I was doing. She thought I was shelving romance novels and helping customers find local history guides. She had no concept that her impractical younger sister was sitting in an FBI command unit, serving as the primary translator in a hostage situation that could determine whether 23 people lived or died. For the first time since receiving Director Holbrook's call, I allowed myself a moment of bitter satisfaction. Every family dinner where they'd mocked my Arabic studies, every suggestion that I should pursue something more practical, every eye roll when I talked about cultural understanding and international communication, it all seemed absurd now. But the satisfaction lasted only seconds before being replaced by the weight of responsibility. This wasn't about proving my family wrong. This was about helping desperate people find a way out of an impossible situation without anyone else getting hurt. Agent Torres looked up from her laptop. "The next time they call, we need to start moving toward concrete solutions. Medical care for Ahmad, better air quality for the hostages, and some kind of media arrangement for their evidence about the camp." "And if they refuse to negotiate?" asked Agent Morrison. "Then we hope Miss Millfield can convince them," said Director Holbrook, looking at me with an expression that carried the weight of 23 lives. Outside the command unit, I could see news vans multiplying like weeds, their satellite dishes reaching toward a gray sky that looked like it might rain. In a few hours, this would be the lead story on every major network. My name would probably never be mentioned in the reports, but I would know that I had played a crucial role in whatever happened next.
The phone rang again at 11:47 a.m., and this time I heard fear in Khalil's voice that hadn't been there before. The fear in Khalil's voice was unmistakable this time, cutting through the static of the phone line like a scream. He was speaking faster than before, words tumbling over each other in a way that made translation challenging, even for someone with my training. "Slow down," I said in Arabic, my voice as calm as I could make it. "Tell me what's happening." Agent Torres watched me intently as I listened to Khalil's rapid-fire explanation, taking notes as quickly as my hand could move. "Ahmad collapsed," I translated urgently. "He's unconscious, and his breathing is shallow. Khalil thinks he's bleeding internally. And there's something else. One of the American students, a girl named Jessica, has asthma. The bad air quality is triggering an attack, and she doesn't have her inhaler with her." Director Holbrook immediately began speaking into her radio, coordinating with medical personnel. Agent Morrison pulled up building plans on his tablet, looking for possible entry points for emergency medical assistance. "Ask him if they'll allow a paramedic inside, one person, unarmed, just to provide immediate medical care." I translated, but Khalil's response was sharp with panic and suspicion. "He says it's a trick. He thinks we're trying to get someone inside who will overpower them or signal law enforcement. He keeps saying they won't be taken alive, that they'd rather die than be arrested without anyone knowing the truth about their families." "Then we need to give him something concrete," said Agent Torres. "Some proof that we're taking their story seriously."
Director Holbrook covered her radio microphone and looked at us grimly. "I've been in contact with CNN and BBC. Both networks are interested in the refugee camp story, but they want to verify the evidence before committing to coverage. The problem is, we can't get access to their proof if they won't let anyone inside." A new voice came through my headphones, older, speaking with more authority despite obvious pain. This had to be Ahmad, conscious again, but clearly struggling. "Ahmad is on the phone now," I told the team. "He's speaking more slowly, but his voice is weak. He says—" I paused, listening carefully to make sure I understood correctly. "He says they have the evidence on a phone that belonged to his cousin Mahmoud. Mahmoud was documenting conditions in the camp for a human rights organization. He filmed everything: the school where the children were learning, the playground they built from scrap materials, the medical clinic that was treating sick refugees." Ahmad continued speaking, his voice fading in and out. "He says Mahmoud's phone also has footage from after the bombing, the bodies of the children being pulled from the rubble, the destroyed school that the Valdoran government claims was a terrorist training facility. But he says they can't just send the files electronically. They need to make sure the footage is broadcast unedited, in full context, so the world understands what really happened." Agent Torres was typing rapidly on her laptop. "What if we arrange for a journalist to come to the scene, someone they can speak to directly through the windows?" Before I could translate, Ahmad's voice became urgent again, and I heard shouting in the background, multiple voices speaking in English. "Something's happening with the hostages," I said, alarm creeping into my voice. "Ahmad is saying the American girl, Jessica, is getting worse. Her breathing is becoming more labored and she's starting to lose consciousness." Through my headphones, I could hear what sounded like crying, and a man's voice speaking English with an American accent. "Please, she needs help. She's just a kid. She's only 19 years old." Ahmad came back on the line, and his words were heavy with a desperation that transcended language barriers. "He says they never wanted anyone to get hurt." I translated, my voice quieter now. "He says Jessica reminds him of his sister's middle daughter, the one who died in the bombing. He's asking what they should do." Agent Torres leaned closer to her microphone. "Ahmad, Jessica needs immediate medical attention. If we send in one paramedic, just one person, no weapons, no law enforcement, will you allow treatment? The paramedic will also look at your leg injury." As I translated, I could hear discussion in the background, multiple voices speaking Arabic, some arguing, others pleading. The conversation went on for minutes while we waited, tension thick in the command unit. Finally, Ahmad spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "He says yes," I translated, relief flooding through me, "but only one person, and they have conditions. The paramedic must be a woman, they don't trust men in uniform, and she has to bring a journalist with her, someone who can receive the phone with the evidence and guarantee that the story will be told. Director Holbrook was already coordinating with the medical team. We have a female paramedic on scene, Sarah Chen, 15 years of experience, completely trustworthy. But finding a journalist who is willing to enter a hostage situation, "I'll do it," a voice said from behind us. We turned to see a woman in her 40s with graying hair and intense green eyes wearing a press badge that identified her as Miranda Walsh from the Hartford Tribune. She must have arrived while we were focused on the phone call. "Ms. Walsh, this is extremely dangerous. We can't guarantee your safety. I've covered wars in Syria and Iraq. I understand the risks. But if these people have evidence of war crimes against children, the world needs to see it." Agent Torres studied her for a moment. "You're willing to enter that building with just a paramedic, no security escort? If it means getting the truth out about what happened to those kids in the refugee camp, yes." I found myself speaking up. "Ahmad, this is important. There's a journalist here named Miranda Walsh. She's covered conflict zones before, and she's willing to come inside with the paramedic to receive your evidence. But you have to promise that the paramedic can treat both Jessica and you without interference." Ahmad's response was long and emotional, peppered with what sounded like prayers in Arabic. "He's agreeing," I translated, "but he says if this is a trick, if anyone tries to storm the building or harm his brothers, they'll—" I paused, struggling with the translation of a phrase I'd never heard before. "They'll what?" Agent Torres pressed. "They say they'll join their family in paradise. I think he means they'll detonate explosives." The command unit went silent, except for the hum of electronic equipment. Agent Morrison looked up from his laptop with a pale expression. "Thermal imaging isn't showing any obvious explosive devices, but if they have suicide vests or improvised bombs—" "We proceed carefully," Agent Torres said firmly. "Sarah, are you prepared to go in there knowing the risks?" The paramedic, a compact woman with steady hands and confident eyes, nodded. "Those people need medical attention. That's my job." As plans were finalized for the entry, I continued listening to Ahmad through my headphones. His breathing was becoming more labored, and I could hear the American students in the background, some crying quietly, others trying to comfort Jessica.
"Ahmed," I said in Arabic, "the paramedic and journalist are getting ready to come inside. But I need you to help me understand something. You keep saying you want the world to know the truth. What exactly do you want people to understand?" His answer came slowly, punctuated by pauses as he struggled for breath. He says Americans think all Middle Eastern conflicts are about terrorism and religion, I translated for the team. But this was about children who just wanted to learn how to read, about families who had already lost everything and were trying to build something small and safe. He says the Valdoran government destroyed hope itself when they bombed that school, and now they're lying about it to avoid international consequences. Ahmed continued speaking, his voice growing stronger with passion despite his physical weakness. He says his sister, Amira, was teaching the children English because she believed education would give them better futures. She wanted them to be able to speak to people from other countries, to build bridges instead of walls. She died trying to shield 2 of her students from falling debris. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, using the Arabic language skills my family had dismissed as impractical, to translate the story of a woman who had died teaching English to refugee children because she believed cross-cultural communication could change the world. "The paramedic and journalist are ready," Agent Torres announced. "Ahmed, we're sending them in now. They'll approach the main entrance with their hands visible. Please don't do anything that might be misunderstood as threatening." As I translated, I realized that this moment, Sarah Chen and Miranda Walsh walking toward that embassy building, would determine not just the fate of 23 hostages, but whether a story about murdered children would ever be told to the world. And somehow, a woman who had been shelving books at a small-town bookstore just yesterday had become the voice bridging 2 languages, 2 cultures, and 2 very different understandings of justice. The radio crackled. "Sarah and Miranda are at the front door. Ahmed, can you see them?" Through the thermal imaging display, I watched 2 small figures approach the embassy's ornate front entrance. Sarah Chen carried a medical bag in one hand, the other raised to show she was unarmed. Miranda Walsh walked beside her, a small recording device visible in her palm, her press credentials hanging around her neck like a shield against the unknown. Ahmed's voice came through my headphones, strained but trying to maintain control as he spoke to someone inside the building. I could hear multiple conversations happening simultaneously, Arabic between the militants, English among the hostages, and what sounded like hushed prayers in both languages. "He's telling Khalil to unlock the front door," I translated quietly. "But there's argument. Someone else, a third voice I haven't heard before, is saying this is a mistake, that we're trying to trick them." Agent Torres leaned closer to her radio. "Sarah, Miranda, hold position. Don't approach the door until we got confirmation." The wait felt eternal. Through my headphones, I could hear the heated discussion inside the embassy growing more intense. The new speaker was speaking rapidly in a dialect slightly different from the others, more urban Palestinian, possibly from the West Bank rather than the refugee camps. "The new speaker is named Tariq," I translated as I listened. "He's Ahmed's cousin, and he's suspicious of our motives. He's reminding them that American promises are worthless, that they'll be arrested and tortured the moment they let anyone inside." Ahmed's voice rose, and I could hear the pain in every word as he argued with Tariq. The conversation was punctuated by Jessica's labored breathing in the background and someone, probably one of the other American students, pleading for help. "Ahmed is overruling Tariq," I said. "He's saying that Jessica is an innocent child who came here to study, not to hurt anyone. He says if she dies because of their actions, they're no better than the people who killed their family." I heard the click of locks being disengaged, and through the security cameras, we watched the embassy's heavy wooden door swing open slowly. A figure appeared in the doorway, young, maybe mid-20s, with a cafetiere wrapped around his face, but his eyes visible above the fabric. This had to be Khalil. "Sarah, you're clear to enter," Agent Torres said into her radio. "Miranda, stay close, but let Sarah take the lead." As the two women stepped across the threshold, I felt my heart rate spike. They disappeared from the external camera view, entering a space where we could only track them through thermal imaging and whatever audio came through Khalil's phone connection. "They're inside," I reported, watching the heat signatures on the thermal display. "Khalil is leading them toward the staircase. I can see the cluster of hostages in the conference room on the second floor, and there's someone on the floor. That must be Ahmed." Through my headphones, I heard Sarah's voice, professional and calm. "Sir, can you tell me where you're experiencing pain?" The response came in Arabic, and I found myself translating in real time for both the command unit and for Sarah itself. "Ahmed says his abdomen is very painful, especially on the right side," I called out, knowing Sarah would hear me through her earpiece. "He thinks he might have internal bleeding from when debris fell on him at the refugee camp." Sarah's medical assessment was swift and professional. Possible internal bleeding, likely trauma to the spleen or liver. His blood pressure is dropping and pulse is rapid. He needs immediate evacuation to a trauma center. "Tell him he needs to go to a hospital," I said in Arabic to Ahmed through the phone connection. "Tell him his injuries are too serious for field treatment."
Ahmad's response was weak but firm, and I felt a chill as I translated his words. "He says he won't leave until the story is told. He says he'd rather die here than let his family's deaths be forgotten." Miranda Walsh's voice came through clearly. "Ahmad, I'm Miranda Walsh with the Hartford Tribune. I want to hear about what happened at Zara camp. Can you show me the evidence?" What followed was one of the most emotionally devastating conversations I'd ever translated. Ahmad, despite his obvious pain and declining condition, began describing the day of the bombing with the kind of detail that comes from trauma burned into memory. He talked about his sister Amira's excitement that morning because she'd finally received a shipment of English textbooks donated by an international charity. She'd been planning a special lesson about American holidays, thinking it would help the children dream about better futures. He described the sound of the jets, how everyone in the camp looked up with concern because military aircraft usually meant trouble, but no one expected bombs to fall on a refugee settlement that had no strategic value. Through Miranda's recording device, Ahmad's voice would soon carry to the world as he explained how he'd run toward the school when the first explosion shook the ground, how he'd found his 7-year-old nephew trapped under concrete blocks, still alive but crying for his mother. Mahmoud was there with his camera. Ahmad continued, his voice growing weaker. He was documenting everything for the human rights people.
He filmed the rescue efforts, the bodies being pulled from the rubble, the survivors screaming for their children. I translated every word, feeling the weight of each sentence. This wasn't just translation, it was bearing witness to a tragedy that would otherwise remain buried in the noise of Middle Eastern conflict. Meanwhile, Sarah was working on Jessica, who had been moved to a chair near the windows where the air quality was slightly better. She said her oxygen saturation is dangerously low. She needs immediate treatment with bronchodilators and possibly oxygen support. The complexity of the situation was overwhelming. Ahmad was dying slowly from internal injuries, Jessica was suffocating from an asthma attack, and 21 other hostages were trapped in a building with compromised air quality, while 3 desperate men tried to ensure their family's story would be heard before they themselves were killed or captured. Tariq's voice suddenly cut through the Arabic conversation, sharp with alarm. I translated his warning. American police are moving closer to the building. He can see them through the windows. He thinks this medical emergency is a cover for an assault. Agent Torres immediately got on her radio. All units, maintain distance. Do not advance on the building. Repeat, maintain current perimeter. But Tariq wasn't satisfied. His voice rose to a shout, and I could hear him arguing with both Khalil and Ahmad about what to do next. Tariq is panicking, I reported. He's saying they should take one of the Americans to the roof as a human shield, to make sure the police don't try to storm the building. Ahmad's response was immediate and forceful despite his weakness, and I found myself translating an argument between dying men about the value of innocent life. Ahmad is refusing, I said. He's telling Tariq that they came here to honor their family's memory, not to become the kind of monsters who threaten children. But Tariq was beyond reasoning. Through the thermal imaging, I could see him moving toward the cluster of hostages, and Sarah's voice suddenly became urgent. Something's happening up here. One of the men is approaching the students with what looks like a weapon. I spoke directly into my microphone in Arabic, addressing Tariq by name. Tariq, listen to me. I know you're scared. I know you've lost people you love, but hurting these students won't bring your family back. There was silence for a moment. Then Tariq's voice came through the phone connection, suspicious and angry. Who are you? Why does an American speak Arabic like someone from our homeland? Because I learned Arabic to build bridges, I said, switching between English for my team and Arabic for Tariq. Because I believe people from different cultures can understand each other if they take the time to listen. Agent Torres was watching me intently, and I realized that this moment, this conversation with a desperate, grieving man holding a weapon, might determine whether anyone else died today. Tell me about your family, I said to Tariq in Arabic. Tell me who you lost. And somehow, in a conference room filled with hostages and the smell of fear, a man with nothing left to lose began to cry as he told a stranger about the people he would never see again. Tariq's story poured out in broken Arabic, punctuated by sobs that transcended language. Through my headphones, I heard him describe his wife Layla and their infant son Omar, 6 months old, just beginning to smile and reach for toys. They had been visiting Amira's school when the bombs fell, bringing lunch to the children because the UN food supplies had been delayed again. I translated quietly for the team while maintaining the conversation with Tariq, creating a bridge between his grief and their understanding. He says his wife was helping Amira teach the alphabet to the youngest children. She was holding their baby while pointing to letters on a chalkboard when the ceiling collapsed. He found them together under the rubble. Layla had covered Omar with her body, but neither of them survived. Through the thermal imaging, I could see Tariq's heat signature moving away from the hostages, his weapon lowered. The power of being heard, really heard, was doing what no tactical strategy could accomplish.
Tariq, I continued in Arabic, your wife died protecting your son. She died trying to give children hope through education. Would she want you to threaten other people's children? His response came between gasping breaths. I just want people to know they existed. I want the world to know that Omar would have learned to walk, that Layla sang to him every night. They weren't terrorists. They were just people. Agent Torres was coordinating rapidly with her team, but I could see the recognition in her eyes. This was the moment we'd been working toward, when grief could be transformed into something other than violence. Sarah's voice came through the radio. "I need to get Jessica out of here immediately. Her condition is critical and Ahmad is going into shock. If we don't move them both to a hospital in the next 10 minutes, we're going to lose them." I translated Sarah's urgent medical assessment to all three men, emphasizing that both Ahmad and Jessica were running out of time. But it was Ahmad himself who provided the breakthrough, his voice barely a whisper as he spoke to his companions. "He's telling them to let everyone go," I translated, my own voice thick with emotion. "He says Amira would never forgive him if other people's children died because of his need for justice. He says they've accomplished what they came for. The story is being recorded. The evidence will be broadcast, and the world will know what really happened." Khalil's voice joined the conversation, and I could hear the exhaustion and relief in his tone. "Khalil agrees," I reported. "He says they never wanted to hurt innocent people. They just wanted someone to listen." Miranda Walsh's voice came through clearly from inside the building. "Ahmad, I promise you that this story will be told. I've been recording everything, and I have contacts at international news networks. The footage from Mahmoud's phone will be seen around the world." What happened next felt like watching a dam break, but instead of destruction, there was release. Tariq walked away from the hostages completely, setting down his weapon and sitting heavily in a chair by the window. Khalil began unlocking the conference room door where the other hostages had been held. And Ahmad, despite his critical condition, managed to hand Miranda Walsh the phone containing his cousin Mahmoud's documentation of the massacre. "All hostages are being released," I announced to the command unit, hardly believing my own words. "Sarah is preparing Ahmad and Jessica for immediate medical evacuation." The next hour passed in a blur of coordinated activity. Emergency medical teams rushed both Ahmad and Jessica to Hartford Hospital, while the remaining hostages, 21 frightened but unharmed people, were escorted from the building by FBI agents and given immediate medical and psychological support. Khalil and Tariq surrendered without resistance, their hands raised as they walked slowly from the embassy towards the line of law enforcement vehicles. There were no dramatic final moments, no desperate last stands, just two men who had lost everything, finally ready to face whatever consequences awaited them. But it was Miranda Walsh's phone call to her editor that would change everything. Within hours, major news networks were broadcasting the footage from Mahmoud's phone, heartbreaking images of children learning to read in a makeshift classroom, followed by the devastating aftermath of the bombing that had killed them. The Valdoran government's claims that the refugee camp had been harboring terrorists crumbled under the weight of video evidence showing nothing but families trying to build better lives for their children. International pressure mounted immediately, with the UN calling for a full investigation and several European nations threatening to suspend diplomatic relations with Valdoran. By evening, I was finally released from the command unit, emotionally and physically exhausted, but with a sense of accomplishment I'd never experienced before. Director Holbrook walked me to my car personally, her expression serious but respectful. "Ms. Millfield," she said, "what you did today saved lives. Without your cultural understanding and language skills, this situation could have ended very differently." "I just translated," I said, though we both knew it had been much more than that. "You did more than translate. You built bridges when everything was falling apart. The FBI would like to discuss ongoing opportunities with you, consulting work, cultural liaison positions, international assignments." I drove back to Pinehaven in a daze, the radio full of news reports about the Hartford Embassy crisis and its peaceful resolution. My phone had been buzzing with missed calls and messages, but I'd been too drained to check them during the drive. It wasn't until I was climbing the stairs to my studio apartment above the bookstore that I finally looked at my messages. 17 missed calls from Delilah, 12 from my parents, and text messages from relatives I barely spoke to. The first message from Delilah was timestamped at 2:47 p.m. "Zara, call me immediately. You're on the news." The last one, sent just 20 minutes ago, was different in tone. "I saw the interview with Director Holbrook. She said you were the primary translator. Zara, I had no idea. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." My parents had left voicemails that progressed from confusion, like, "Zara, honey, someone said you were involved in that embassy situation?" to concern, "Please call us, we're worried," to something approaching awe. "Your father and I watched the news. We're so proud of you." But it was the message from my old professor, Dr. Al-Rahman, that meant the most. "Zara, I knew you were special when you were my student, but today you proved that language learning isn't just about communication. It's about compassion. You saved lives today by understanding not just words, but hearts."
The next morning, Mrs. Gwendolyn knocked on my apartment door with a cup of coffee and the Hartford Tribune. Miranda Walsh's story about the refugee camp massacre was the front page headline, complete with photographs from Mahmoud's phone that showed the world exactly what had been lost when those bombs fell. But there was also a smaller story, buried on page 3, with my name in the headline: "Local Woman's Arabic Skills Key to Peaceful Resolution." Mrs. Gwendolyn smiled as she handed me the paper. "I always knew those language books you read downstairs would amount to something important," she said. "I just never imagined it would be this important." My phone rang as I was reading the article. Director Holbrook's voice was crisp and professional, but I could hear satisfaction beneath her words. "Ms. Millfield, I have news. Ahmad survived his surgery and is expected to make a full recovery. Jessica is breathing normally and will be released from the hospital tomorrow. And the Valdoran government announced this morning that they're opening an investigation into the bombing of Zara camp." "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it completely. "There's more. The State Department wants to interview you for a position as a cultural liaison specializing in Middle Eastern affairs. The pay is excellent, and you'd be based in Washington with opportunities for international travel." I looked around my tiny studio apartment, then out the window at the parking lot where I'd stood just months ago, wondering if my family had been right about my impractical choices. "When do they want to meet?" I asked. 6 months later, I was working from the State Department building in Washington, D.C., using my Arabic skills to help prevent conflicts before they escalated to violence. I'd handled diplomatic communications from Cairo to Baghdad, translated sensitive documents that helped shape international policy, and served as a cultural consultant on Middle Eastern affairs. But the moment that meant the most came during a family gathering, ironically, at the same Aunt Cordelia's house where I'd been mocked for studying Arabic 2 years earlier. This time, the conversation was very different. "So, Zara," Uncle Bartholomew said as he carved the turkey, "I have to ask, how did you know Arabic would be so important?" I looked around the table at faces that had once shown polite dismissal and now displayed genuine respect and curiosity. Delilah was watching me with something approaching awe, while my parents beamed with pride they'd never shown for my academic achievements before. "I didn't know it would be important," I said honestly. "I just knew it was important to me. I believed that understanding other cultures and languages could make a difference, even if I couldn't see how at the time." Fletcher, now a sophomore in business school, looked up from his phone with interest. "Are you glad you didn't switch to something more practical, like Delilah suggested?" I thought about Ahmad, recovering slowly but determined to honor his family's memory through advocacy work for refugee rights. I thought about Tariq, serving a reduced sentence but corresponding with me in Arabic as he worked through his grief. I thought about Jessica, who had sent me a thank you card in carefully practiced Arabic script. There's nothing more practical than being able to understand someone when they need help the most. And there's nothing more valuable than being the bridge between people who think they can't understand each other. Later that evening, as I drove back to my apartment downtown DC, I thought about that morning in the command unit when I had first heard Khalil's voice through my headphones. How terrified I'd been. How uncertain about whether my skills would be adequate for something so important. The brass nameplate on my State Department office door now read Zara Millfield, Senior Cultural Liaison. But I still kept my old Arabic textbooks from college on the bookshelf, right next to the commendation letter from the FBI and the framed photograph of me shaking hands with the Secretary of State. Because sometimes the most important lesson isn't about proving other people wrong. It's about staying true to what you believe matters, even when you can't see where it's leading. My family had called my Arabic studies pointless until the morning when those skills became the difference between tragedy and hope. They'd laughed at my impractical passion until it became the foundation of a career that let me serve my country in ways they'd never imagined possible. And now, whenever young people ask me about pursuing studies that others call impractical, I tell them about a day when everything I'd learned in college mattered more than I could have dreamed, and how the languages we speak in the margins often turn out to be the ones the world needs most.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.